to get the recording. We're going to be talking about Power Pivot today, creating measures and KPIs in Excel Power Pivot. So this is based on a chapter from my book, Modern Data Analytics in Excel. Like I said in the event description, you do not have to have read this book. You're certainly welcome to read it later if you wish. You can find it wherever books are sold, as they say, and grab yourself a copy. We are going to dive right into the repo associated with that book. So I left this in the event description. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat as well, and the usual disclaimers apply here. If people come in later, you are welcome. Actually, that's not the link that I wanted. Let me give you a better link than that. Okay, let me delete that. And I do see some people coming in, so chances are I'll need to share this a couple of times. Download files are here. Okay. That link is going to be a little easier to get your hands on. Okay, so click that link. All right. And you should be able to download. It'll take a little bit longer because these are all the files used in the book, all the data sets, the exercise files, the solutions, and so forth. Once you do that, please give it an extract just for safekeeping there. And once that is set up, you should see a modern data analytics Excel. You've got a few chapters there. Okay. And that is where we will jump in from. So I have the downloads files. Just leave me a like if you got that. Give me a thumbs up. I see people still filing in, so just put that in the chat again. Download files are at the link in the chat, and once you have that ready to go, we will move forward here. If there are any other questions, please don't hesitate to use the chat. It's going to be the best way to communicate. I do have AV turned off for this meeting. We are recording. Recording will go out over email. Okay. Any signs of downloads there? I'm going to leave a thumbs up here. Just give me a heads up that you got the files, and then we will move on. Okay, I see one. I see two. All right, I'll wait for like one more. I know it's a little later in the day. I appreciate you staying flexible with the reschedules. All right, I'm going to assume we're good with files. Okay, so what we're going to do here is this event is mostly on chapter 8, okay? But chapter 8 is kind of a short chapter, and it really builds on what we did in chapter 7. So we are all about Power Pivot in this part of the book. Power Pivot, if you're not familiar, is a relational data modeling tool available in Excel. If you've ever used Power BI, a lot of these features are similar. If you've heard of DAX, for example, in Power BI, we're going to be doing a wee tiny bit with DAX here today. The interface in Excel is a little different, not quite as flashy, but we will do our best here and build a data model and look at building some basic measures and building some KPIs based on those measures. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is let's go to chapter 7, if you could. Just open the blank workbook. Shouldn't call it blank, but the starter workbook, chapter 7. And that's going to be our way in here to discuss Power Pivot. All right, and assuming it looks like maybe more people came in, I shared the download files there again. All right, so we are in chapter 7 now. We've got 3 tables here. Okay, the information mostly is in the orders table. We've got some supplementary information found in returns and some additional information found in users. So the classic Excel way to do this, if you wanted to report on all 3 of these, probably would be to do like a VLOOKUP or an XLOOKUP. Now, And that's okay for certain approaches, for certain things. There's a reason it's in Excel. Uh, However, it's a little clunky. Vast majority of the time, the reasons that Excel workbooks are super fast, maybe not the vast majority, but a good percentage of the time, the reason Excel workbooks are clunky is overuse of lookup functions. You're replicating information. VLOOKUP is a kind of slow function, okay? And you just get a lot of bloat when you look up, because these are thousands and thousands of values that you're unnecessarily repeating if you were to write that VLOOKUP. So what we're going to do is use a data model or relational data model so that we have relationships among these tables. That's going to allow us to do far more powerful analyses than looking this up into one, Franken table, as it were. So that's the start here. Now, some of this I'm going to go through a little bit fast because I do want to make sure we get into building measures, talking about implicit versus explicit measures, and so forth. If you don't have Power Pivot, let me share a link with you. It is available in most versions of Excel. You're just going to need to, most versions of Excel for PC, I should say. You're just going to need to download it. Not even download it, but just unlock the add-in, basically, enable the add-in. Okay, so if you don't have it, you can check that out. How do I get Power? Okay, Power Pivot. Okay, let me actually, I think I shared the wrong link with you. Okay, start the Power Pivot add-in for Excel. It's right there. Ideally, most of you see it. Okay, so let's get started and just build this basic relational data model. So I've got these three tables in here. Okay, I'm going to go to, let's manage. We may need to do one more step here. Let me see how the workbook is set up. Okay, so I don't see anything in here, so that's fine. All right, so the what we're gonna do right now is uh we're gonna load the data into Power Query. Okay, this is probably a good review anyway from other sessions. Okay, and then add to data model, and then we're gonna build the data model. Okay, and then we'll look at measures and KPIs, which is the main focus of today. So these are our steps. First thing we're going to do is bring each of these tables. So we do have these three tables. We need to get them into the data model. There is a button here that says add to data model. Now this would be the shortcut way of doing this. I wouldn't suggest that you do it this way. You may as well take the 3 or 5 extra mouse clicks and load your data in to Power Pivot via Power Query, just in case you need to clean up this data in any way. All right, maybe you want to filter out rows, you need to normalize it in some way, unpivot it, split some columns. Chances are more likely than not that there's some kind of data operation you'd want to do. So it's worth the extra few mouse clicks to not do this. And instead, we'll go to insert. Okay. I'm sorry, we'll go to data. It's been a long day. We'll go to data, and we are going to get data from our table / range. Okay. Make sure you see that. If you don't see it, you might be on a laptop. You might need to click on a button that says like get data, like right here. Okay. Depending on the size of your screen, it may or may not be its own icon. So we're going to go ahead and add these three tables to the data model. I do have previous sessions on this, so I think they were recorded, or you can check out the book if we're going a little too fast right now. But what I want to have us do is set everything up for us to get into this data model. So what I'm going to do, I'm good with this data right now. We're not going to do anything in Power Query. We'll just use this as a staging. So I'm going to go ahead and close and load this. And I'm going to go ahead and close it, load it too. And this is the important part. We're going to load it only to a connection. We're going to add this to the data model. Why only create connection? Well, the whole point of what I'm doing right now is so I can use this data in the data model. I don't really care about seeing it as a duplicated table. In fact, that kind of negates what we're trying to do here, be efficient in the data that we display. So what I'm going to do is only create that connection, okay? And then I'm going to add that data to the data model. All right, I'll show you this one more time. Okay, there are going to be 3 tables that we need to do here. So the next one with return, same steps, right? Data from table / range. Okay. And what we're going to do is close and load. We don't need to do any steps to clean this thing. It's good as it is. Close and load 2. Add this data to the data model, only create connections. Okay, that was a little faster. I didn't know that double clicking it was going to load it. Let me right click that again, load 2, and show you what you should see. Only create connection, add this data to the data model. Yours probably is going to default to add to a table and not to add to the data model. You can actually change those settings. You can take a look at that later after the class if you want to change them. That is a possibility. So only create connection, add this data to the data model. Okay, make sure those are turned on. And we'll do one more here with users. Yes, there would be a way to bulk this, but sometimes it's a little faster just to do it the old-fashioned way. All right, only create a connection, add this data to the data model. All right, so we did that 3 times. Hopefully everybody was able to hear that. See that? I saw a note about trying to hear but can't. I see, well, yeah, my mic should be working. If you're having an issue, usual PC things apply. I don't know. Well, I guess it doesn't matter what I say because you can't hear me. So, orders, returns, and users. These are our 3 tables. Now we're ready to go to the data model. So let's head back to Power Pivot. We're going to go to Manage. Okay, so these are in the data model now. Now what we need to do is assemble them, create those relationships. Okay, so we have 3 tables. This is a pretty basic data model. We have orders, we have returns, we have users. All right, so the way, the layman's way to think about this, and let me close out of this briefly here, is how would you VLOOKUP this data, or how would you XLOOKUP this data, right? I've got an ID column here. Okay, chances are that's probably going to be important when it comes time to create these relationships. All right, this other one, okay, so yes, order ID, that would be the way we could VLOOKUP that one. Region, we don't have a region number here for better or worse, but I think if I go over here, there is a region column. Okay, so these are the focal points through which we can create that relational data model. So when we go back to the Power Pivot data model, I'll head back here. Let's go to Manage. It's just a simple matter, drag and drop. Going a little bit fast here, again, just to give us time to focus on measures and KPIs. You can check out the book or probably previous recordings. If it's not recorded yet, I'm sure I'll get to it at some point. All right, so just drag and drop order ID to order ID. And, okay, did that work? Let's try that again. There we go. Sometimes when I'm sharing my screen and recording, things get a little more laggy than they should. All right, if that's not working, let's go to create relationship. Okay, from orders to returns, we're going to make that based on order ID. Let's click OK. All right, so that looks good to me. Okay, let's try the same thing here. Again, we're thinking about how would we VLOOKUP these tables, as it were. I see region. I'm going to drag and drop to region. Okay, that's still acting weird. If you're not able to drag and drop, you can always go up to create relationship, users, and orders. Okay, and okay, region looks good to me. All right, great. Okay, so we have our data model now. Great news. Now what we can do is start to calculate here. All right, so we're going to try a few different things. First of all, what I'm going to do is let's go to data view. All right, so we've created this relationship. Okay, and now I'm interested in crunching the numbers, right? And these are, at the end of the day, these are 3 separate tables. So one thing I might think to do is let's head over to the end of this table here. Okay. And I'm going to create, I see a profit column. Okay. I see a sales column. So I want to create profit margin. I want to know about my profit margin. So let's add a column here. We're going to call this profit margin. Okay, all you need to do with this case, again, I'm in data view. Okay, I'm in my orders worksheet. You can leaf through these. Let me hit enter to create this column. You can leaf through these worksheets just like in regular Excel. Okay, you'll see interface is a little clunky, but we'll survive here. Okay, go to orders. We have profit margin, and I'm going to divide, let's say, profit. Okay, that looks good to me. Okay, and then we can divide it by sales. All right. So let's hit enter. It is going to take a second to run this. I will put this in the chat. So we've created a calculated column, and this does appear if I were to cross-check these numbers that we've got our profit margin calculated for each row. Okay, and for each row is an operative word here. Okay, so we can get our calculator out and check that. What I'm going to do is insert this as a pivot table. This is really where the magic happens with Power Pivot. So we've got our data, we've created our data model, we've created a calculated column. I'm going to come up here to home, I click on pivot table. Okay, let's create a new worksheet. All right, so now we have a blank table, a blank pivot table. It looks like any other pivot table. And what I want to do, let's right click and show field list. Okay. Make sure that you're going to refer to the tables with the little orange cylinder icon. Those are the ones that are actually connected to the data model. These ones that are not, unfortunately, you can't hide them. These actually refer to like the source data tables. So they're not really connected in a data model. Okay, so unfortunately, there's not really a way to hide them or anything. Just use the ones with the cylinders. So let's say, for example, that I'm going to take, let's say, product category. I'm going to drag this 2 rows or drag and drop it or click it, whatever way is fine. Let's take sales, okay? And let's take profit, because that's what I want to cross-check by. Okay, so all these tables or all these columns were actually found in orders. Okay, so I have sales, I have profit, I have product category. Where things are really interesting is, for example, maybe I want to split this by manager. Now, manager is not in this table, right? Manager is only found in the users table. But if I drag and drop this, because we've created that relationship, I am able to leverage data from multiple fields. Okay, so that's one of the key features of Power Pivot. We were able to, based on those relationships, without having to do VLOOKUP, slow down our workbook, or do any of that, be able to create a pivot table from multiple tables. We're not going to focus on that right now. What I want to have us do is cross-check that this profit margin is working. And the way I'm going to do that is just simple arithmetic here. Let's go into Excel. I've got, let's say, C4 divided by D4. And that, okay, there it is. Okay, those are our profit margins. Let's add profit margin here and see if those are the numbers that we get. They're not at all what we get, right? It's a sum of profit margin. Maybe we want an average. Okay. And that doesn't look right either. Okay. So what is happening here is we go back here to manage. Okay. Do I have Power Pivot open? I do have Power Pivot open. If I go back here to my data model, what we've just done here is create a profit margin for every row. We've basically calculated row by row the profit margin. That works if we just have a flat table. Usually when you're reporting on data, though, you want to be able to, let me close this. You want to be able to roll this up into different views, look at it, at a different category level. And this is really what you want, right? You want to take the sum of profit, you want to take the sum of sales, and then you want to divide by it. So this is not going to give us, whoops, this is not going to give us what we want. So what we need to do is get a little more intelligent about how Power Pivot creates these measures. If you created a calculated field before in a pivot table, it's right up here. It's actually grayed out now, but back if you were not using Power Pivot, you could create a basic calculated field that would give you something like profit margin. That is grayed out here in Power Pivot. So we will need to write this on our own. We're going to do that with a few steps here. Okay. Any questions so far? Making sense? I know I'm going a little fast. I just want to make sure that we have enough time to cover kind of like the main attraction here, as it were. So in general, one of the exceptions is if you're creating like a categorical variable, right? If you were to, let's come back to our data, and maybe you wanted to recode, critical order priority as 1 and not specified as 2 and low as a 3, you're probably not going to take an average of those values, right? You're just assigning them into some kind of a code. If you know you're not going to aggregate your data, maybe you can create a calculated column. If there's any chance that you're going to aggregate, it's probably not the best idea to use that calculated column. All right. So what can we do to make this work better for us? All right. We are going to create some basic calculated measures here. Okay. So there are a few ways to do this. If I go back to Excel, you'll notice that I was able to drag and drop profit and get a sum. And if I change this to an average, I could do that just like any other pivot table. Okay. If I were to, let's take like order ID. Okay. And that takes a sum. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense to sum up. It's pretty arbitrary order ID. Let's reaggregate this as a distinct count. That's kind of cool. You can't do that in regular Excel, at least not right now. You cannot create a distinct count. That's not one of the measure options in a regular pivot table. You can only do that with Power Pivot. So there's some kind of cool stuff that you can do with just dragging and dropping as you would with a regular pivot table. This is not generally the best practice. The issues for this is you're going to see this causes a lot of bloat. In your list of these are measures, we actually are creating measures. I mean, we just think of these as like aggregations, but in Power Pivot, we are creating individual measures for these. We can't easily reuse these. So even something as simple as profit margin, we'll want to take the sum of profit, right? We'll want to take the sum of sales and divide them. So we need to build measures on top of each other and refer to other measures. So when we're doing this dragging and dropping business, we're really not allowing ourselves to reuse that expression. It's kind of like in coding, you want to save your data to an object so that you can refer to that object later and build on that object. If you're not creating explicit measures, you don't have that possibility to build on the work that you've done. So we're going to get rid of these implicit measures and we're going to move to explicit measures. So implicit measures, and this is actually the same in Power BI. You do have the option in Power BI if you're going to create a plot or a table, you can just drag and drop and change the aggregation. And when you're starting out and exploring, it's fine. But if you wanted to build something more robust, you're going to be building more complex metrics and things like that. Definitely a better practice to save those as explicit measures rather than just the implicit. So this is really just drag and drop pivot table as normal. Okay. And we're going to say instead use explicit measure, which is we're going to create a custom measures that can be saved, reused, referred to. Okay, so again, really saving our work so we can build on it later. All right, So let's get rid of these implicit measures. I'm going to go back to the data model. Okay. And if you were ever wondering what this is about down here, this is showing us the implicit measures that we've created, right? There's this weird little like secondary spreadsheet down here. Uh, you may or may not see those implicit measures right now. If you do not see them, make sure that you go to the advanced tab in the ribbon here in Power Pivot and just make sure show implicit measures is turned on. Okay, so here what you're going to see is this is kind of all like the junk that we've built. Okay, and now if we went back to Excel, so we have profit margin, right? We tried to take an average before, we took a sum, okay, and this is not working out how we want. We could even see this if we went back to diagram view. Okay, you'll see down here at the bottom are our implicit measures. So we want to squash these, and I'm just going to delete them. You could do this from diagram view or from your data view. Either way is fine. Just right click them and we will make a better attempt here. Let's just go ahead and delete these. Again, distinct count is kind of cool. You can't do that in a regular pivot table. But if we want to be a little more future-minded and extensible with our data model, this is the right way to go. Okay. Hopefully everybody's implicit measures have been deleted. Any questions so far? I know it's a smaller group and it's later, so there might be a fatigue issue. But if there are any questions, please let me know. Hopefully there haven't been any other AV issues. Looks like there was one earlier. Yeah, the resources are, let me share those again. Okay, we are in yeah, chapter 7. So I just reshared the link to the download files. That was also in the event description too. So between that and what I shared in the chat, you should see them. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is create our measures explicitly. And that way we can reuse them. So even something like product margin, or sorry, profit margin, we will want to create, again, like we talked about, create a sum of sales, create a sum of profit, divide those two. We'll have 3 measures basically. So let's go ahead and do that. Close out of here, okay? And I'm going to go back to Power Pivot, okay? And let's go to measures. We're going to go to new measures. Okay, so this is where we are going to create explicitly. So rather than dragging and dropping, we are going to explicitly create, and I'm going to call this total sales. Okay. Okay. Now, this is DAX. We are going to scratch the surface of DAX. I'm no DAX expert. There are many people more qualified to talk about DAX than me, but I can do a sum function, and you can too. So let's do it together. We are going to take sum, okay? It's pretty similar as Excel. We are going to take sales. Now, I would suggest that instead of just referring, you'll see that you have a couple of options here. You can refer to the table name and the column, or just the column name. Again, what are we talking about? What is the name of what we're doing? Explicit measures. So err on the side of being explicit and stating exactly where this column's coming from. It's coming from sales. Okay, orders, sales. I'm sorry, it's coming from the orders column. So we're taking the sum of sales. I'm going to put that in the chat here. Okay. And what we can even do here is format this, which is nice. So when we use this in the pivot table, we will always get the same consistent formatting. And let's make that a currency. Okay, 2 decimal places. Okay, so that looks good to me. All right, so there it is. And what you're going to notice is that, again, instead of it being just implicitly created, which means we can't use it again, this is listed here as its own measure, right, in our list of fields. So we can take this and add it in again. And if I try to edit this, like value field settings, this is all grayed out. So I do not have the option here to change this to like an average or a max or min. I guess another option, another nice thing too here is that nobody's going to mess up your expressions, right? They're locked down a little bit more as well, which is another benefit. Okay, so that was total sales. We're going to do the same thing with margin or profits, I should say. Then we'll get to margin. So I don't know why I'm looking for it in the pivot table. We're going to create it ourselves. We're going to go to new measure. Let's call this total profit. Okay, it's going to be the same thing, sum function. Okay, profit. And again, I would definitely, err on the side of being explicit, state what table this is coming from. We can make this a currency. Okay, and I'll put this in the chat as well. I'll click OK. All right. And we have our total profit now. Okay. Those numbers are a little different than I thought. Maybe they're fine. In general, what we could do just this once, let's take profit here. So I think I did. Maybe the expression was wrong or something. Oh, I took sum of profit margin. That's why it looks so weird. So see, we want to make sure we cross-check our numbers here. Let me remove that. Let me get rid of that in the chat here. I took the sum of profit margin instead of the sum of profit. So let's do a couple things here. We'll go back to the data model. Since we've determined that profit margin, this calculated column, does not work, we should just delete it. So let's just delete that column. Okay. Let's delete that. Okay. Now let's go back into Excel. And I'm going to go back to manage measures, total profit. This should be sum of profit, not profit margin. Okay. And now I think, and I'll put that in the chat. Okay, that's what I was looking for. So, if you have something that turns out it didn't work, probably a good idea to err on the side of squashing it earlier than later. Okay, so now we have what we want. All right, so we're back to where we were. There's not a whole lot of benefit to this. Again, these can be reused. We know that nobody's going to tamper with them. They're formatted. So there are some nice wins. But really where the benefit comes in is that we're able to refer to these and reuse them. So the simplest example here is, let's create a new measure. Okay, I'm going to call this profit margin. Okay, and what I'm going to do is, let's call this total profit. And I'm going to refer to the measures in themselves, right? I'm not going to redo sum of profit here. I've already written that, right? I want to be as concise as possible. So if I take my total profit here and divide it by total sales, okay, I will put that in the chat. This notation is pretty similar to Excel tables. We are writing DAX again. This is baby DAX. We are referring to these columns. I'm going to make this a percentage. If you go down to number, you'll get that option in the dropdown. Okay, and let's click OK. And now we have something that looks like a realistic profit margin. And again, it's never a bad idea to double check ourselves. D4 divided by C4, right? Okay, 2.16%. Yes. And now I should be able to slice and dice this any way I want. We could go back again. We can use data in other tables. So for example, let's break this down by manager, for example. Okay, and that profit margin continues to calculate. So that is really the very basic beginning of working with explicit measures and why that's a better practice than implicit for the reasons that we've talked about. Okay. Any questions with that so far? And then we're going to look at KPIs briefly, and we will close from there. Cool. All right. So while we're on the topic of explicit measures, we're going to create one more because we will want to use explicit measures in our KPI. If you're not familiar, KPIs, key performance indicator, the idea is that, we want some way to benchmark ourselves and track the performance based on either some objective standard or some benchmark that we set ourselves, maybe like budget versus goal or something like that this year versus last year. In this case, there is a column that was already created that is sales target. So what we're going to do in this case is compare sales versus sales target. We're going to create a measure for sales target. We can compare those measures, and Power Pivot and pivot tables have some nice conditional formatting options that will make this comparison a little bit easier to do. So the first step is going to be going back here. We need to create a measure for our total sales target. So we will do that up here. Let's call that total sales target. And I will make that sum of sales target. Not that. Sum of sales target. Okay, close parentheses. Okay, and again, may as well format this. Okay, so that's looking good. Okay. Okay, disregard the plus sign I put on there. Let me see if I can edit that really quickly. All right, there we go. Okay, cool. Okay, so we have our sum of order sales target. Perfect. All right, and again, if you want to see all of these, right, you can come up here to measures and manage measures. This has a list of everything that we've created so far. Pretty simple stuff so far, but Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. Now this is where we're going to create our KPI. Okay, so we want to create a comparison between total sales and total sales target. All right. That's this one right here. So we've covered basically all the Power Pivot buttons already, right? This is how you get to your data model. This is how you create measures. This is how you create KPIs. This is how you add data to the data model, although I wouldn't suggest you do it from here. I would suggest you go through Power Query in case you need to clean the data. Detect settings, I wouldn't worry too much about. So we focus on the first four, the important ones. Okay, let's go to new KPIs. All right, and this thing is a little dated. I will say, okay, there's not really a way. It's red, yellow, and green, which if you take like one half semester of data viz, they tell you not to use this color palette because there are people who can't see red versus green. Okay, so it's not the most inclusive palette, but this is what we have in Excel right now. What we're going to do is, like we talked about, we want to compare one measure versus another. All right. And the first one, Excel guessed right. Total sales will be our base value. Our target value is going to be total sales target. So you can compare this either to an absolute value, right? So if you like your sales was like 5,000, maybe this would be good for like baseball teams. And if they have a winning record of like 70%, then you say that's good versus not, right? Whatever it, sometimes you want an absolute value. This one we want to compare our sales measure to another measure, which is going to be total sales target. All right. So the way to read this thing is that anything where we are at 40% of target or less, it's going to be red. Right between 40 and 80, it's going to be yellow. And then anything above 80 is going to be green. We'll leave that as is for now and see if we like it. There's some icon styles here. We can change those if we want. I'll just leave it at the solid. I wish these were better, but they are what they are. There are these three dots here. And if you have cases where maybe a higher number is worse, maybe like wait times or something like that, you could do that. So you would just change that palette there. But I'm good with this one. There are actually some like bifurcated ones as well, where maybe there's, a little more complex of a story where something in the middle is what you want or what you don't want. You could play with those. I think for the most part, right, the higher, the better is going to cover most of your use cases, I would think. But if you have something else you want to track, you could do that. So let's click OK. All right. And now what we're going to do is create another pivot table. So let's go back to data model and insert a pivot table. You could also just use the pivot table that we created already, just as long as you're creating a pivot table that's connected to our data model is all we need to do. All right, so we're going to see here, if we go down to orders, there is a new set of values here, okay? So this is our KPI. We're going to compare our values, which is our total sales, to our goal, basically. All right. So I am going to, let's take region. Okay. I'll drag that into my rows. And just for good measure, we'll take customer segment and drag that into our columns. Okay. And now we want to play around with this KPI. So this thing is a little finicky. What I would suggest to do is, I think the way we'll have this work is if we click on value and then status. Okay. Right now, it looks like we are at 80% to goal for everything. So what we're showing here is this is our goal. These are our actuals. Okay. This little thing. So we're basically adding like conditional formatting. Right now, everything's at 80% to goal. Maybe that's what we want. Okay. So in this case, what I would encourage doing is let's maybe make the goal a little bit harder. Maybe we want to say it's got to be 95% to goal, because being 20% off budget is probably not so great anyway. Okay, so let's go back here to our KPIs. We're going to manage our KPIs and we'll edit. And we'll try to turn the screws on here a little bit more. Okay, let's say it's got to be like 97% to goal. Okay, otherwise you're getting a yellow. And maybe it's got to be like, 88%. You could come in here too and type exactly what you want. So if you wanted like 90% and like 98% or something like that, you could do that. This line right here is just 100% to goal. Okay, so now we're being a little less forgiving with these thresholds than before. And I would suspect that now we'll see some different colors. So yes, exactly. So now we can easily enough, and this isn't perfect, there's a lot more that you can do. There's a reason that I think a lot of this development work for Power Pivot and DAX and everything has gone into Power BI to build a lot more engaging, exciting, customizable reports. But if you're using Excel, if you just want a really quick way to compare, I'm going to remove the goal here, and we could even just, minimize this and try to make this a little easier to look at. This gives us a quick way to kind of glance at who's performing, who's not performing, who's working well versus the goal and not. So that's KPIs in Power Pivot in a nutshell. Kind of limited, but it's better than just trying to eyeball this yourself without the use of color and conditional formatting. Okay. So that is everything for today. We've gone through KPIs. We looked at explicit versus implicit measures, when to use which. Moral of the story usually is explicit. And that's what we'll cover today. So thanks so much for attending. I know today was a bit of a late start. Appreciate everybody who did come out. As usual, if you've not attended these before, I do pass out an event feedback survey. This really helps me. I give these for free. I don't ask for any like joining my leadership academy or whatever. There's no money being exchanged here, but if you would leave me a review, and if you could also share this too, if you find these helpful. I know I've been doing a lot of these. If you find them useful, if you think your coworkers are, invite your coworkers, invite people on LinkedIn. You're welcome to share. The bigger reach, the better. And the event survey I just shared, if you got time, you can fill that out. The other thing, as always, just a little recap of what's coming next. We're going to be talking about ChatGPT in a couple of weeks, getting a bit further into DAX, looking at things like how to filter your data, how to create year-to-date figures and compare this year versus last year and things like that. Some more stuff with AI, talking about Power BI, Python, all sorts of stuff. So you can check out the schedule. I put that in the chat, but these are all free. Most of these are recorded. Speaking of the recording will go out. If not today, then tomorrow. I'll put everything together. I'll package it, and then again, check your email. If you try to come back in here into Teams and get the recording, you won't be able to. So it's going to be a YouTube link that's going to be in an email. You can also find it, if you are connected with me on LinkedIn or, I trust your Googling skills. It's usually not that hard to find. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And if there are any last questions, I can take those. Otherwise, we'll end a little bit early today. Thank you, Mark, for stopping by. And I will stop here.